This is Delhi. Please stand by for our next program. This is All India Radio. In our national program of talks tonight, we bring you a dialogue entitled G20 and Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, in which Officer on Special Duty and Secretary in the G20 Secretariat, Shri Muktesh Pardesi, is in conversation with Vikram Bahel, media personality.
Welcome to the national program of talks. With India now holding the presidency of the G20 since 1st of December 2022, today we're going to look at why this is an important opportunity for India and what India hopes to achieve during its presidency. My guest today is the Officer on Special Duty and the Secretary at the Secretariat of the G20, Muktesh Pardesi. Welcome.
Thank you.
So, Muktesh, the presidency is with us for the last, little over a month, and you are the secretary at the Secretariat, which is in fact a roaming secretariat. There's no fixed secretariat. There's no one particular place.
That's right.
The Secretariat moves every year and goes to the country where the G20 is being hosted. So this time it's here, and then I believe you also have a troika system where the outgoing country and the incoming country
That's right.
also assist in the Secretariat. Before we go into the details of what India hopes to achieve and why this is so important for India, just give me a rundown as to where we stand today, since it's been a little over a month that we have been holding the presidency.
Thank you very much for inviting me to speak on G20 priorities and how we are going to carry this forward over the next 1 year. G20 is a premier deliberative forum of 19 leading countries of the world plus European Union. So this has a certain voice in the international governance system. India is very happy to take over the presidency, which began on 1st December last year, and we will carry this up to 30th November this year.
So it'll be for 1 year.
For 1 year.
Right.
As you mentioned, G20, it's not an organization, it's a forum, it's a process. So the presidency rotates from one country to other. And the decision making is implemented through a troika system. So outgoing presidency, then the current presidency and incoming presidency. So as of now, we have the troika consisting of Indonesia, India as the current president, and incoming would be Brazil. For the first time in the history of G20, and it's a great coincidence, that the troika consists of the developing countries, the emerging economies. After Brazil, it would be South Africa's turn. So for 4 years, for the first time in G20 forum, the voice of the global South will be heard, and India is going to work on this, the great opportunity of raising the profile of the global South and raise its voice before a group of countries which largely dominated by the developed world.
So you say this is in fact the first time that you'll have 4 consecutive countries, which are developing countries.
That's right.
Raise their voice. But you've been a diplomat for many years, and I ask you this based on your experience, and the question is really about consensus building, because as you rightly mentioned, this is a forum, and it doesn't work where you work through majority decisions, it works through consensus. So everybody has to be on the same page for any decision to be taken and agree to the same end result before it could be announced. How difficult is this? And as I said, as a diplomat, you would know, how difficult is it to build consensus on especially issues that are already being discussed around the world, like climate change. So where do you see the situation today on consensus building?
I think that's where the uniqueness of India's leadership comes in. India has played a proactive role in the international system. Not only we are comfortable with the developing countries bloc, but our voice and our leadership is also accepted by the developed world. So we have been a voice of moderation, we have been a voice of consensus building. Therefore, the world expects that India and India's leadership particularly being the Prime Minister at the helm of the affairs, will be able to straddle through and create a consensus against the backdrop of a world which is very divided and fractured today. So the whole international community is looking up to India to help in bridging the gap between the developed and the developing world.
Well, predominantly the G20 is an economic forum, and that's how it started out way back when there was an economic crisis in 1999, and then the 2007-8 economic crisis pushed it up from the level of just ministers and central bank heads
to the summit level.
A summit level. And today we see a situation in the world where some people are talking of the possibility of economic trouble coming in this year, even with recession probably hitting many parts of the world. How important is it now for us to recognize that and try and rally around everybody at the G20 to take certain decisions to try and soften the blow, even if it is coming to soften the blow, and see how we can work around the economic troubles that are there?
You are very right. We have seen 2-3 most difficult years in the present century. COVID-19 hit us hard. There was problem of debt. So a lot of things are being discussed under what we call finance track. As you rightly said, the G20 started as a financial forum. So since the beginning, there are certain issues which have been on the agenda of the G20. Some new issues are added. For instance, now the debt servicing, which became an acute problem against the backdrop of the COVID-19. That's on the front foot. There are, global vaccination, the climate financing. There are certain issues which are attracting the attention of the global community. As the world recovers and as we see post-COVID scenario, all these issues will be on the table and be discussed very closely under the finance track of the G20.
So I believe the finance track has 8 working tracks.
That's right.
How are you planning to proceed with these? What do you hope to achieve on these?
As I said, G20 started as a financial forum. Some of the agenda items we inherit from the past presidency. There are certain legacy issues which carry forward to the next presidency, because at times solution may not be sought, agreement may not be arrived at within 1 year. There are issues which require a number of years for us to deliberate and agree upon.
So those are the rollover issues.
Yes, rollover issues. So those issues will be discussed during our presidency. On some issues, there could be good progress. In case there's a requirement of taking it forward to the next presidency, it goes on.
And then you have, apart from the finance group, you also have the Sherpa track, which has 13 working groups, I believe. What is being looked at there?
What happened when the G20 was elevated at the summit level? There were new issues added. Apart from the core financial issues, several issues related to the development, etc., were added to the G20 discussion. Sherpas are personal envoys of the leaders. They help leaders in carrying forward the discussion. So there are several issues like education, working group on culture, tourism, health. All these issues are under the Sherpa track. And we have all line ministries involved in discussions and conducting these meetings. But all understandings flowing from the finance track, as well as the 13 working groups under Sherpa track, all culminate into a final document which will be placed before the Leaders Summit for adoption. That's called the Leaders Communique, as it was adopted in Bali in November.
And everything that goes into that communique has to be unanimous.
Has to be, yes, it's based on consensus.
Based on consensus. Interesting way of working, because unless you get everybody on board, you can't really take it forward. And that's the special flavor that the G20 brings. It tries to thrash things out on a table across all the countries that are involved and try and come up with something that will be acceptable to all, with no pressure of the majority pushing in certain agendas or pushing in a solution, which is what brings me to the next issue of the engagement groups. Now, you have two very interesting additions in this particular G20. One is your startup group, and the other is disaster risk management. Tell us about these two and why have they been added?
Let me explain first what are engagement groups. As G20 is a governmental forum, it was thought in the beginning itself how to engage civil society as partner in discussion. So different presidencies have come up with initiatives. As of now, we have 10 plus engagement groups. One of the oldest engagement group is called B20, Business 20. Presidency had freedom, or I would say have some space to add any initiative or engagement group if they wish to. But that's based on also you have to sound out to the member countries, and if understanding, engagement group could be added. Since India has core strength in the startup field, we decided to set up an engagement group on startup.
And what do you hope to achieve by that?
Well, to attract attention of the financial world towards potential of the startup. India is a leading country in terms of startup revolution, and they get their voice heard because everybody relating to the financial world is engaged with the G20 process. So the startup, they get their voice heard in this forum. The other area where India has been working, it's called disaster resilient infrastructure. We have taken an initiative. Several countries have become member. It's called Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. So therefore, we have thought to add a new initiative on disaster resilient the infrastructure. These are the two additions done by India.
And in this forum, you're going to have around 200 meetings. I believe that is...
More than 200.
More than 200 meetings. That's quite a task for you, and especially considering that these meetings are going to be scattered across the country, 50 locations, I believe. So the Secretariat is going to be very busy.
We are busy. The work has been going on for last several months. In February last year, the cabinet decided about the structure of a G20 secretariat, how we are going to implement conduct of 200 plus the meetings. Some ideas have been forthcoming during the course of the planning. And so we started with 20-30 places, but it was understood at the highest level of the leadership that we should spread the message of the G20. It's a diplomatic activity, but how do we engage the people? I think the best way of engaging the regions and states and the people would be taking one of the meeting to closer to those places. So if a meeting is going to a remote area, for the first time they will hear about a diplomatic activity. They come, they confront a G20 issue, they see for themselves, and it also gives an opportunity for the local community to engage and understand stakes of India in the international diplomacy.
So are you planning to cover the entire country? Every state will be covered?
I would say that's we are trying to cover all states and union territories through some activity.
Coming to the question of these locations, why is it that you decided to do such an elaborate effort? Because in the past, I don't think any of the meetings have had such an elaborate effort. So what was the thought process? Apart from, of course, giving the locals an opportunity, was it also perhaps to showcase India in its totality?
I think that was part of the thinking process. No country, no G20 presidency has done these meetings at this scale. Number one, India itself is a very diverse, geographically diverse country. We have so many states and union territories. So taking the commitment to take a meeting or event to each state and territory, that commitment came from the Honorable Prime Minister himself. So that's a task cut out for the Secretariat. We are working hard with the help of the states and the local institution to make it happen. I think the philosophy behind this is, as you rightly said, to showcase India to an incoming visitor. Many times the visitor outside India, they have a limited view of, say, Golden Triangle, Delhi, Agra, Rajasthan or Kerala, Mumbai, but people may not have heard about Indore or places in Northeast. So this gives a rare opportunity for India to showcase the potential of the regions in terms of tourism and the cultural strength as well.
So this really comes down to the projection of soft power, as some people put it.
I would say our civilizational heritage, that, India is one of the 10 oldest civilizations in the world. And when our tagline of the G20, the Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, comes out of that civilizational heritage, oneness.
The oneness of the
Oneness,
world.
yes, one world, one family, one future. That oneness, if we have to understand this oneness, there is no other country better than India. And we would like to impart this ethos representing our civilizational heritage with the fellow countries.
Let's talk about the decision making and the process of decision making at these various meetings. How is it really set? How is the agenda set? How is the discussion led? And what really can India do in its leadership role today to set the agenda, to try and bring subjects that are important and then bring people to discuss it? Of course, the outcome will be up to everybody else and the way the discussion flows. But India could, I guess, in some cases at least bring points onto the agenda. Am I right?
You are right. Though the outcomes are consensus-based, but the very fact that as a presiding country, India can bring certain subjects on the table, that itself is a big step forward. So as the presiding officer, you can bring in core priorities of your country, and I would say largely the global south. India is very conscious of the fact that our national priorities and the priorities of the global south get adequate voice and representation in the G20 deliberation. That's a core objective of our presidency.
And what are the areas that you think India would be bringing out when you talk of these special subjects that need to be looked at for the South?
There are two things. One, on 15th August, Prime Minister speaking from the Red Fort, he mentioned about a few priorities, national priorities over next 25 years. We have to become a developed country. Our development has to be inclusive, women-led. There has to be focus on the youth power, sustainable development, sustainable lifestyle. All these things are cleverly woven in the agenda of the G20. These are also coming from the global south. For instance, the climate change. It's fixing up targets are fine, but unless we get access to technology and finance, the targets will not be achieved. The other day, the Prime Minister launched an initiative called LIFE, a sustainable lifestyle, which is a part of our national ethos. So we are bringing that idea to the fore in the G20 discussion. So these are some of the things which are brought forward by India's presidency in terms of the agenda items. And we'll see how to create a consensus and understanding around these themes.
There are two areas.
One area which is also very core to our interests is reformed multilateralism. India would like to play more active and I would say contribute to the world's peace and development, and the country is prepared as one of the second largest country in terms of population, fifth largest economy, the largest democracy. We are not only the largest democracy. There are some studies now showing that India was the fountainhead of the idea of democracy. India has been the mother of democracy. So some of this core, I would say, ingredients of our nation will get reflected through these deliberations and also through when we interact with the delegation outside the meeting setup.
There are a number of areas where India has done very well in the past. IT was one, and we are now at the threshold of AI, artificial intelligence. Is it likely that we would be discussing artificial intelligence and the future of it at this G20?
The Ministry of IT is involved. They have the working group. There's a lot of focus on digital public goods. The digital goods with strong public dimension. India is a leader in development of the digital public goods. Some of the things, for instance, the Aadhaar and UPI and other such schemes have caught the attention of the world community. So there'll be discussion certainly on data and how data can be a helpful factor in inclusive growth.
So when we look at the size of the countries that are involved in this discussion, that's 19 countries plus the European Union, we're looking at a very large number of people, approximately 60% of the world population. You're also looking at about 80% of the global GDP and 75% of global trade. So it's a very substantial portion of the world on the economic side as well as the population side that is going to be coming together. The 1 year that we have is going to be very important, of course, but if you were to look at it from the Secretariat's point of view, what is it that you think is the most important?
Well, we have already spoken about our priorities, the presidency. Apart from the priorities, we would like to present the best of India to the participants and delegations which will be coming to India. We have to showcase to the world that India has soft and organizational skills. For conducting any meeting, we require two things. One is the physical infrastructure, and the second would be organizational infrastructure, whether the country has sufficient infrastructure in services sector, hospitality sector, tourism sector, whether we have enough the volunteers, we have trained manpower in hospitality, hotel, tourism, taxi. All these aspects are also important part of country's infrastructural backing. So through these meetings, we are also not only we're showcasing, we are helping the local community to create capacity at the local level.
Yes, at the micro level, that's good. But my question was more to do with the macro level, that we have this pool of very, very important people from around the world because they constitute a very major portion of the GDP and the population. So do you think there could be more emphasis on, let's say, dispute resolution, be it on the economic front or be it of any type, whereby India's, as you rightly said, cultural past and our way of working could help formulate certain procedures and methods and bring people on the table to resolve disputes into the future?
Yes, that is right. When Prime Minister spoke about that this is not the time for war, he hinted at harmonious international relations. In the financial sector, for instance, whether it's WTO, how the world gets divided in terms of its priorities, economic priorities in international body. India, coming from the developing world and with aspiration to become a developed country during the Amritkaal, we have that natural talent and we have that capacity also to close gaps and make bridges between different elements of fractured polity in today's times.
Muktesh, you have a very hard task ahead, some would say, because it's operationally a very large task, should I say. Where do you see the challenges today for the Secretariat?
We are looking at opportunities. And if there are challenges, there is a support from the highest level to make it happen. And I must say, whether it's not only the central government, but all states are coming forward, the municipalities are coming forward, civil society is coming forward, educational institutions, students, youth bodies, they have all joined in making a G20, as the other day Honorable Prime Minister said, People's G20. Having been a diplomat, many times diplomatic activities are not understood at the grassroots level. And being the largest democracy of the world, the people in this country, they can ask a very natural question. What is it in G20 for the country and for them? So through supplementary events and by taking the G20 to all states and union territories, we are explaining India's aspirations, India's growing clout in the world, and how G20 brings tangible benefits to India, not only by hosting, but also in the years to come.
You raised a very interesting point there. People asking that what's in it for them, which is true because the common man would not probably be able to see the complete filter down of the benefits. And you have an important task there of explaining how it would filter down to every citizen in the end. So I think you have a tough task ahead, operationally, of course, but as you said, a very exciting opportunity to showcase the country and to also take this international forum to the various parts of the country and let the citizens of India get involved with it. Muktesh, thank you very much for sharing your views with us.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and New Year greetings to all your listeners.
Thank you. Until next time, goodbye.
In the national program of talks tonight, you were listening to the dialogue entitled G20 and Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, in which Officer on Special Duty and Secretary in the G20 Secretariat, Shri Muktesh Pardesi, was in conversation with Vikram Bahal, media personality. Produced and presented by Naveen K. Gupta of All India Radio Delhi, this program came to you from the Delhi station of All India Radio.